Meanwhile, college football national championship game decided on Monday night as Ohio State beat Notre Dame for their 8th national championship, and the ratings are in, and more than 22 million people watched the national championship game on Monday night. 22.1 million, according to ESPN's PR wing. It was their most watched, or it was the most watched non-NFL sporting event over the past year. Its highest peak was 26.1 million viewers, so it average-wise came out about 4 million less than the peak, but 22.1 million. That peak came in a little 15-minute window between 7:30, 7:45, probably when the game was still a little bit interesting. Obviously, it faded there in the second half, especially early on in that second half and late in the first half. But down from last year, Michigan and Washington had 25 million viewers, so about 3 million more for that game a year ago. Also had a peak of 28 million viewers, so their high spot hit about 2 million more viewers in their window at its highest rate. But they also played a week earlier, so I don't know how much that comes into play or not, but that was the most watched last year's national championship game in about 4 or 5 years. So that was a high mark since 2020. Now back down again. And still better than the 2021 game. That was the worst watch. That had less than 20 million viewers. But, yeah, 22 million on average for Ohio State Notre Dame. I think you're happy with that if you're ESPN. As I said, most watched non-NFL sporting event of the year. So there you go with that. Not sure what expectations might have been, but 22-plus million.
They're not paying for 22 million, though. That's a good number. I'm not saying because you just gave the numbers, but – I think that they may say they're happy with it, but I wonder if down deeper they're disappointed it didn't hit that 25 plus.
Yeah, or that it didn't go up because it was the first year of a new thing. But that's my question about it. But again, people have to take time to get used to something. They have to adjust to it. And also, like we've talked about ad nauseum this week, the calendar just has to change. You had the last football games before it were both two really good NFL games that everyone was talking about. So there are a lot of football fans who might have had to be reminded that, like, oh, by the way, Ohio State and Notre Dame are playing for the actual title this week. So the more they can get away from that, if they can somehow get the NFL to agree when they at least get to the championship game to let them play that on Saturday and the NFL doesn't have to play multiple games on Saturday, that could be something. But I guess – we'll see if that happens.
I asked Sam Kahn about this. Do you want me to read a couple of things he said?
Did you know that most calorie deficit calculators don't work? My dietitian recommended the Lasta app to me, and it turned out to be the only one that got my calorie deficit right. Thanks to it, I lost 14 pounds in 1 week. Ready to kickstart your journey to healthy weight loss? Calculate your ideal calorie deficit using the Lasta app right now.
As a lot of people have said, it's too late in the calendar, and people are not used to it yet. You mentioned that the MLK inauguration had a little bit to do with it, maybe distracted some people. Just a theory, but I do wonder if some of the novelty of these teams has worn off after 3 rounds of postseason play. 20 years ago, when fans tuned into the national championship game, maybe they hadn't seen the two teams who were playing, and now that there's almost a little bit of fatigue factor in even the bigger boy brands that are playing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. There's a variety of factors that could play into it. Again, it was a week later than normal. I'll tell you what, I don't give a damn what the TV rating was for the College Football National Championship. I just wanted to see an entertaining game. If it's 10 million, that doesn't change my fandom. If it's 45 million, it doesn't change my fandom.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think there's way too many people obsessed with TV ratings, and I'll say, as I say every time, I bring it up because I do think it's interesting, it's fun fodder, and I know it can matter for folks who take it a little bit deeper into comparisons with conferences and things like that and bigger picture stuff. But yeah, I don't care if ESPN's happy with it or not. That's what I'm trying to say. But it was a nice enough number, over 22 million. Although looking at the last few years, you had 22.1 for this year. I mentioned 25.1 last year, which is the first time they'd been over 25 million in about 5 years, and you had Michigan as a part of it. You had the new blood in Washington, so that was something a little bit newer there. The lowest watched, I mentioned it, I think I might have said 2021, though. It was the 2021 season, but the 2022 national championship game, Georgia-TCU, we know what happened there. It was a complete annihilation.
Yeah.
17.2 million, so that was 5 million less than this year's, and that was the lowest in college football playoffs short history. 22-6 in 2021 for Georgia, Alabama, and then the COVID year, 2020, you had Bama and Ohio State, which it doesn't get any bigger than that. They had 18.7 million. So that was COVID year, probably a lot of lack of interest. But 22-1, the third biggest number in the last 4 years, and certainly right there in the range of, the top 3 or 4 of the last 5 to 6 years. So it's a little bit of a decline, but I think a more entertaining game would have probably brought more eyeballs. So 22.1, the average for the college football playoff national championship game. And look, if that does freak people out, I'm sure we'll hear about it, and then we'll hear why that led to 6 automatic berths for the Big Ten or something because the ratings weren't good enough. But that's still pretty good. 22 million people is not not like the Everybody Loves Raymond rerun or something like that. That's pretty damn good. And again, biggest sporting event outside of the NFL.
Yeah. It is. Like, people can freak out about these things, but the World Series is the comp I'll say is that, the World Series, whether it's Texas and Arizona or the Dodgers and the Rangers, Fox hasn't stopped paying for it. I mean,
right.
Yeah, I'm sure they go into some meetings and go, okay, well, we didn't get the kind of number we did a year ago, but we were in this ballpark. As long as they're within the landing zone, I guess, of what they want expectation-wise on any kind of sports investment, they're going to keep paying for it.
Well, someone's going to always pay for it, and you're as good as what 2 people think you are, or one person, right?
There's only one thing that would happen for them to get rid of something, and that would be catastrophically low ratings, which actually happened to the NHL right after they had that long work stoppage. ESPN got rid of it for a while. Like, when the contract was up, they're like, yeah, no, we'll see where it goes, because people, especially in the lower 48, realized they didn't care as much about hockey until it got going again, and then they came back to ESPN. So outside of something like that happening, nobody's getting rid of anything.
Do you think, and this is another note, do you think that enough of the Sam brought this up, the access of telling stories about those who the players are is like Gameday does a good job with that, but that's one show. Fox maybe 2. Do we hear enough and know enough about the players until the championship game that we can cling on to maybe some of the stories?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to that. I think one is it's hard to cling on to anybody when they're moving around constantly, and that's part of people not having as much of a investment. If you're a K-State fan, you had an investment in Will Howard, and then he leaves. Are you sitting there rooting him on for Ohio State? Maybe you are, but I bet you a lot of people weren't. I bet you a lot of people didn't even care to watch it because they knew they were about to watch Will Howard win a national championship. So I think a lot of the moving around has made it difficult. And then even honestly, if you were to do a big profile on some guy, but you're halfway through, you're like, oh, wow, what a journey. And then you find out he's been on 3 schools, and now he's at the biggest school possible, and he's making $1 million. Are you really emotionally attached to this guy the same way if it was he lost his mother and all that, but then it's he's on his 4th school, and it's just, I think it's harder to wrap your arms around these guys to his point, very much so. It's very much harder.
I think it does in a similar way for a long time, and I don't know if college basketball's ever fully recovered from it, but I do think that the one and dones hurt college basketball a little bit because when I was a kid in the 90s, you could watch that same Duke team, that same Kentucky team, the same UNLV team, that same Arkansas team that kind of ran up against each other in the postseason for a couple years. Michigan, the story of the Fab Five is so cool. When you watch that 30 for 30, because they lost to Duke multiple times. They had multiple times where those 5 guys together as a team, succeeded and failed, right? So that we all saw it. Now, I mean, everything's just a 1 year.
Michigan also was a team either you loved them or you hated them.
Yeah, but I mean, like what I'm saying
you
is,
need some of that sometimes.
Yeah, but the continuity. Yeah, and you loved them or you hated them because you knew those guys. You knew the guys. Now everything in sports, every team in sports is a one-season television show. It's just a one-season television show, and the next season is a different thing altogether. And I think that does hurt it a little bit because again, you don't. If you're not a fan of that team specifically, if I'm a fan of Ohio State, I don't care who they get, that helps me win the national title. But if I'm a fan of just say Boston College and I love college football, am I going to be really locked into, this guy is, from here and here and here? Maybe not. I may not have as much passion for it.
Yeah, so I think some of the roster turnover makes it harder to really invest and kind of grow with guys maybe the way you used to. I also think the lead-in sucked. There's a whole weekend of the NFL, and they're like, surprise, here's the national championship game. Welcome back to work this week. Hey, by the way, once you're done with your Monday, national championship game. You haven't heard a thing about it the last 2 days because the NFL's taken over and taking 24/7 news coverage of sports in America. So, yeah, I think the lead-in just kind of sucks. But we also know that they're not going to turn it to Friday because Friday's not historically a good viewing number. So it does come back to the networks. It does come back to the TV viewers, and Monday is the best day to try to get as many as possible, but it's still dropped this year. You can attribute that to longer playoff, later start, lack of investment, Monday nights, whatever you want to, but still 22+ million on average for the national title game. And we'll see kind of where that goes over the coming years and if that's kind of the new norm or different teams create different results moving forward. But there you go with that. So the last broadcast of the year, 22.1 million on average.